Hey everybody, MrAyrit here. It's a great day to be a Hawkeye. Just thought I'd throw that in there before I introduce you to our podcast, Audiophiles Anonymous, myself and Sine Craft. This is episode number 2. And why I'm doing a little intro here is we'll do the podcast here. There's no real video. It's really just audio here. But I just wanted to let you know that this podcast should now be available both on Apple Podcast and Google Podcast. And I'll link the Podbean website down below. So if you want to just do it on like a web player or something like that instead. So without further ado, episode number 2, How to Build a System. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next one. Go Hawks. All right, so Audiophiles Anonymous, I guess, version episode number 2. MrAyrit here with Sine Craft, and we're, again, just talking about our journey, I guess, through this audiophile thing. And, you know, we're hoping that maybe some of you other audiophiles can jump in on this and join us in this conversation and maybe get something out of this. Today, we want to discuss how to build a system. Yes,
it's a deep topic. I'm sure we'll just scratch the surface today, but a little overview on sort of thinking about strategies for approaching that and different methods and yeah, be curious to hear kind of some of your thoughts around it and happy to share some of mine.
You know, I'm glad to talk about it because I got to admit, I don't really feel like an expert in this area because I don't feel, and maybe that's my jumping off point, is I don't feel like I have my system built yet. I don't know, you know, I feel like it's changing, it's evolving. How do you know when you've got what you want? I mean, geez, it's there's so much out there. I'm struggling with it myself. So what's your strategy? I mean, what's your jumping off, get into it? How do you even begin?
Yeah, I think that's where you begin, is by thinking a little bit about what you want. Like, what do you want out of your, let's just say we're focused in the head fi realm for now. And you know, what do you want out of that setup, right? Is it about, you know, is it about a certain sound signature you're after? Is it about an experience of trying things over time? Is it about, you know, trying to focus on a budget? What's the thing, what's your guardrail? What's your framing for what you want out of your system? Because the more things I listen to, the more things I swap, the more I'm realizing that my measure of what I want is like happiness. Like what brings me like euphoria? What do I put on and I go, oh my God, like I am re-engaging with this piece of music in a way I haven't before. So like that's what I'm after. But I think everyone's got to have their own, like I think a very good structure could be like, look, I want to try a few things to learn my preference and then I want to stop and freeze there. I don't know. Do you, like, if you take it back to that 30,000 foot view, would you say you have a philosophy in thinking about your system? I mean, do you have a system or do you have like multiple systems? Like,
I have multiple systems. So I'm a multiple system person, right? Like in my head, I have these different niches that I'm trying to fill, right? I have my sit down at my desk, like the hardcore, I'm getting into it tonight setup, right? Which is like all my best stuff. I have my gaming, like movie at my media center set up. And then I have kind of like a nighttime at my, you know, like going to bed, bedside table set up. And then I suppose I have like a portable setup in there too. And maybe some other weird things from here and there, you know, that come in. So I don't have just one for sure. I mean, I'd be interested to hear your take on that. I don't know. In my head, I don't know that there can be like a one headphone to do it all setup, or I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe
I have a lot of the similar use cases that you described, right? Like there's like a work setup. There's a chillax in bed setup, which is actually also my portable setup. I kind of combine those two into one. There might be that, like, for some people that like this is my total be all end all. This is my stereo replacement setup. This is the one that I sit in the big lazy armchair at night listening to, like money is no object setup. Yeah. And then portable, of course, like super portable, like IEMs and everything's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess you got to kind of define what you want out of things before you can even start to try to like attack it, from any point of view. And, you know, we've talked about this before, but it's all just so subjective and individual on what you're going for that, I mean, I feel like that's maybe the biggest message to even pass along is just that, you know, people could listen to us talk about like what we're working through and like the type of stuff we're going for. But if that doesn't fit your use case, then it might not even apply. So you really just got to identify like what's going to work for you.
I think that's good, right? So I think there are some basic questions. Like when my friends who are not that, you know, obsessed with this stuff ask me for recommendations, they know I'm a headphone junkie and they say, oh, you know, what should I get? I'm like, what should you get? What should you get?
I know.
Well, tell me about like, what do you like? Like, so the things I usually ask them are like, where you're going to use it, how you're going to use it, right? That's a pretty, right. You're going to be in an office, you probably need clothes back, right? You're going to be taking this portable a lot, well, then size matters. You might still go over ear, but size matters, right? How hard is it to drive matters, right? You're not going to carry a 10-pound amp with you on your bicycle. So where you're going to use it is a big question. Money, what do you want to spend? And that's a tough one if you haven't tried a lot of things because you don't know what you don't know, right? But nonetheless, you probably have some kind of budget in mind. So that's an easy way to kind of give yourself a target. What's your sound signature? I think that's the hard one. And for us big time Audiophile Anonymous members,
time, yeah.
like
nice...
we probably have a couple of sound signatures we're after, right? Like that might be system to system. What's your sound signature? But I think universally we all probably have a taste that we might not know how to articulate when we're first getting into the hobby, but is definitely there, right? Like some people love V-shaped stuff. Some people love warmer signatures. Some people love just crazy, sharp, relentless, unforgiving detail in the treble region. Like I feel like people do have a taste, a palette that they tend to gravitate toward. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I think for me that's true, but at the same time, I feel like I want to taste the different palettes too, you know? So in my head, I invest my money heavily in the sound signature that I'm like, that's my sound signature, you know? But I still want to have at least something in the other sound signatures. So if the mood strikes me or if I just need to get a different perspective, I can grab something else.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a weird audiophile. I'm sure that's a weird audiophile thing, but
that's probably who's listening to this though, right?
Yeah, that's probably who's listening to this.
I don't think this is like casual headphones listeners, .com podcast.
That's true. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like it's, and I don't know, I don't know. It feels sad to say, and, maybe it makes me feel a little unaccomplished to be like, after trying all these things, maybe I'm still not sure exactly what I like.
Right. But I think there's still enough there, right, to like get started, have a starting point, right? If you're like, okay, is it one system or multiple systems? For each system, what's the target use case? And then within that system, is there like a sound palette that I'm kind of after for that use case? Like, so I'm with you. I like to have a couple different things to listen to. I think that it's just like eating the same food every day. It's like, it's kind of nice to hear those different signatures. They kind of wake your brain up. At least for me, they kind of like re-engage me with the music, and I hear new things I haven't heard, or I hear, sort of timbre presented in a different way, and it makes me think differently about a song. But it's like, if I'm doing more like background listening while I'm working, I certainly don't want a headphone that's like got a ton of slam and like a ton of like super crispy, sharp little bits. Cause it just, I can't like think while that's happening, but that's me.
One thing that I heard, and I think I'm going to credit, and this is all based off memory, so I could be off, but I think it was Randy at Cheap Audio Man, if you're familiar. I think he said something like, when people ask me what the best $1,000 speakers are, I tell them 2 $500 speakers. So you can have a little variety and you can listen to one for a little bit. And then if you're feeling like it's not, doing it for you, you can switch it out and you can listen to something else for a little bit. So I think that's pretty solid advice, honestly.
Yeah.
At least for me it is, because I know that I can be really, vibing on something for a while, and then one day I'll pick it up and I'll be like, it's just not doing it for me, and then I'll switch something out and I'll be like, okay, now I'm back in. So
yeah.
I think keeping a mind open to at least trying a few different things. I think I mentioned this before in the other one we did, that I have difficulty just like judging one thing in isolation. I really need to have two, so I can go back and forth a little bit and be like, what do I like about this one? What do I like about this one? And then make a decision.
Yep.
So that's one of my best strategies, I feel like, for just like how I decide whether I'm keeping something or selling something, is just having things around to compare it to and deciding, like, is it filling a need for me, or do I have something else that's doing that better?
Yeah. I think that's like, that comes in alignment with the question of like, how do you get started? What's that? And then I sort of divide that into two categories. One is like, how do you know what you like when you haven't tried a bunch of things? And the other is like, where do you spend your money? So I think in most people's systems, right, you've got the source. Where's your music coming from? Let's just talk digital, because analog will totally rabbit hole us. But let's assume you got a digital source, your phone, your laptop, whatever. Maybe you've got a dedicated streamer. Then you have optionally a DAC. Then you have optionally an amp. And then at the end of the chain, you always have headphones. And then there's some accessory questions in the middle, cables, yada, yada. But that's like splitting hair stuff. So like, we don't even need to go there. Like, if you're getting started and you're sort of planning, like, what do you pick? Where do you spend your money? Like, how do you sort of invest in the chain to start to get towards a system that makes sense for you?
Well, I think for me, what I would recommend anybody do is I would never recommend anybody get like a high power requirement headphone to start with, right? Like I think get something that can be driven with anything, so that you don't have to invest a large amount in those other things, because maybe you'll be happy as it is. If you get a headphone that's easy to drive and you get an Apple dongle and it sounds good to you, maybe you'll be done there. And that's a good place, I think, to start. So I would never be like, oh yeah, you need to get an HE6 or something for your first headphone, or a Bayer 600 ohm or whatever. Like, get something that's easy to drive, that you're not going to need to invest a bunch in gear up front to try it out. But so I think headphones in my mind have always been like what you focus on first. But I feel like I usually recommend people buy a stack to start with, really. Like, JDS, Atom stack, Magni Modi stack, Liquid Spark stack, whatever, because I feel like you can find those on the used market for almost like $100 at this point, depending on whatever. And then you're pretty much good. Like, you have headroom to play a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. What would you tell people?
Definitely the headphone is the place to start. And I like that cheap audio man idea about, like, maybe you don't need one $300 pair of headphones to start. Maybe you need two $150 pair of headphones to start, so that you start to compare and contrast and learn. Because I think a lot of this for me was actually just learning what I liked, like what I was shooting for. Because like when you're reading the forums and you're listening to people's reviews, if you know what you care about, like sound signature wise, like if you know, like, oh, I'm a detail guy, or I'm a separation guy or gal, or I like warmth, so I like thicker, like, mid bass or lower mids, or, the things that like get you excited about listening to audio gear. When you figure those out, then you can actually make sense of what people are saying, like what reviewers are saying, what people in the forums are saying. And it becomes, I think, possible without hearing a thing to get to know it and to think about whether it's worth opening your wallet for. So yeah, I'm with you. It's like start with headphones, try a few things, try to get things that are maybe relatively different from each other at first to kind of start to build your vocabulary for what resonates with you. And then yeah, you know, an affordable stack from a reputable vendor is great, because having a little more power like that was a big wake up call for me. Is like driving a headphone with a dedicated headphone amp. You're like, okay, that's a different thing. That's definitely different.
It makes a difference. That's for darn sure.
And then DACs are interesting, you know, like today there's pretty good DACs in a lot of people's laptops and phones. Like they're not terrible. But you will still learn a little bit about what that does to the sound signature and what additional resolution there is to be gained when you add that element. So yeah, I like that. It's like start with a couple pairs of not crazy expensive headphones and get yourself a decent stack, because like synergy is a huge thing, right? Like how well does this thing pair with that thing, pair with that thing? That's kind of the puzzle I'm trying to solve, right? I'm always trying to put the pieces together again to get back to that sound signature that I like. And so if you get a stack from a single manufacturer, you sort of reduce the complexity of the synergy right off the bat. You're like, those two things are probably going to work pretty nicely together. And it just takes a little bit of the variables out of the puzzle when you're trying to get your arms around this stuff.
Well, and I think too, like the synergy stuff, I agree is very important. But when you're talking about that more entry level gear, I think pulling your hair out trying to find the perfect synergy is probably not like a great place to spend your time. You know, all of those stacks from reputable people are going to get you off on the right foot and give you a taste of what quality audio is like. And then once you develop your taste a little bit more, then you can kind of start searching, right? Yeah. But it's not like, I mean, spending hours and hours to decide whether you should buy a Magni Modi or a JDS Atom stack. I mean, I just don't feel like that's worth people's time, really. You'd be much better off just looking at like a couple of different headphones and picking those to go with one of those stacks and then trying those out for sure.
Yeah.
You know, DACs, you mentioned DACs. I just wanted to note, like, I think it's interesting because I've always had the idea that maybe like the DAC is probably like the least important piece of that chain. But at this point in time, that's my most expensive thing in my chain. So it's like that's what I spent most of my money on, which is a weird place for me to be at, but it happened. So I don't really know how to explain that one. But
I'm with you. I think I had a very similar path where I was like, I'm going to get a decent DAC. I'm not going to spend a lot of my time and energy there. But what you realize, you know, as you're spending more money down the chain on the headphones and then eventually on the amp, is that like now you've surpassed the signal that you're feeding those things. You've outpaced the quality of the input. And so then you're like, well, now if I actually spend money here, I recognize the benefits down chain. Whereas I think if you talk to people like, DACs, whatever, they don't make a difference. It's like, well, what was below them? Like what was down the chain from them? And could it even like let you experience what was different from one source to a different source?
Yeah, I don't know. That was just I never thought I'd be in this position, but I am. And that's why, you know, it's a journey, you know. I feel like too, like I don't develop those strong opinions too early. Mm-mm. Right? That like one thing matters more than something else, or that something doesn't matter, or gosh, I mean, definitely don't make those opinions based on what somebody else is telling you if you haven't had a chance to experience it for yourself, because I feel like a lot of that happens out there, and you know, you get your mind closed to possibilities before you even have an attempt to try them out. Yeah. So
that's why I'd encourage most people to ignore everything we say and probably just stop listening.
Yeah, probably.
At this point.
You're probably just as... Honestly, you're probably just as good just out there trying random things and seeing what works for you.
So speaking of things, what do you, I think what I'm seeing on your head looks to me like the LSA HP2, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, you know, somebody that I trust and believe is a credible source said that these were one of the headphones to own under $1,000. So I couldn't help myself, of course.
Jury's still out? Yeah. How are you finding them? They're an interesting headphone. They're a bit unusual, I think, in their signature.
They are a bit unusual in their signature. I find these are one of those headphones where, like, day to day, it's different. Some days I love them. Some days I'm like, this is not what I want at all.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with, am I coming to them clean without listening to anything beforehand? If I'm listening to almost anything before I listen to these, then I don't like them. But if I listen to just them, I can really appreciate them for what they are.
I get that. I think they're like just different enough. It's kind of like going from a planar to an E-stat or something, and I'm just like, oh, I hate this. But it's like if I come to it fresh, I'm like, I love this. This is the best thing ever. Why don't I listen to these all the time? And they have a kind of that weird horn-loaded driver thing. It's like it's just different enough that your brain kind of goes, huh?
I know, and it just, I mean, they're detail monsters, honestly. Yeah. Like, they really are. Just micro details for days, but they don't do any macro dynamics, like, at all.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, but, like, that's what I'm saying. If I'm listening to, like, a Focal and then I come to these, I'm like, oh my gosh, these have nothing. But if I just listen to these, I really enjoy them. So it's weird. It is a brain, I feel like this hobby is a brain training game.
Yeah.
Like 1,000%, I feel that way. And that's why I think, like, you can't just trust what somebody else says, because maybe their brain hasn't been trained properly, or maybe your brain's different, or, I don't know. I just don't feel like, I feel like you got to hear it for yourself, and you got to give yourself time to process and think about it. And maybe that's a good thing for building a system too, right? Is like, being is fun, but it's also kind of the devil, I feel like, because it really brings to light things that are different, and depending on your mood, you can feel like different is really bad some days.
Yeah.
When maybe it's really not, and it's just kind of like after you've been hit with like this huge amount of bass or sparkle or whatever from this other headphone, and then you go to something a little more timid, you might find it a little boring. But if you come to that cold, then you can really, like, your brain is not primed for that bigger stimulus, so you can really appreciate the smaller details.
Yeah, that's well put. That's well put. I think as maybe Steve Gutenberg was making the point of, like, how we'll, like, wake up one morning and we'll be, like, listening to our system. We'll be like, something's wrong. Something must be off. Maybe this screw's loose, or, like, a tube went bad, or, like, well, it's like, you liked it yesterday. You'll like it tomorrow. Like, just take a beat. Like, don't, like, the audiophile search for, like, this could be better. This isn't good enough. I want more. It can be a bit relentless. So yeah, I mean, and that's part of why I think this conversation around how do you build a system with some amount of intention. I mean, you know what? If you're one of these people who won't drive yourself crazy just wandering around through this world and popping things in and out and trying stuff, great. I think there's a lot of type A people in this hobby, and it's like, I think if you give yourself a bit of a roadmap or a bit of a success criteria for what you're trying to achieve, you can keep yourself from kind of just kind of, losing yourself in the journey to the point where, like, it's not fun anymore, because now everything's just about a critique of the thing, as opposed to being like, did I get closer to what I want? Am I actually achieving my goal? Well, that's fun.
I know that you did what was that thing? The MySphere review. I watched that yesterday that you did. And I know that you were talking about listening to music instead of listening to gear. Do you want to speak to that for, like, a moment, as far as, like, how that might factor in to some of this?
I mean, that's, again, I think, are you in this hobby because you are really interested in the technology and you like the gear, or are you in this hobby because you love music and you're trying to have a different kind of connection with it? and it can be both. I think for me, it's both. Like I really enjoy the music, and I really enjoy the technical aspect of it. What I don't like is when I get lost in the technical aspect and I forget about the music, because that's the only universal truth. That's the thing that's like, if the world ends and I just get like a little bit of music and a crappy pair of headphones for the rest of my life, that's okay as long as I get the music. If the world ends and I have a sweet setup and nothing to listen to it on it, it don't matter. So yeah, I think the MySphere are interesting. Kind of like the RS1A RAL headphones were, and that they're both up. There you go, MrAyrit shaking a pair on camera.
They're goofy.
They're goofy.
I feel like an idiot wearing.
Yeah, you got to wear those in private. And say the same thing with the MySphere, but the RAL are even more ludicrous looking. They're cool though. The engineering on them is pretty impressive.
They're surprisingly comfortable, I would say. Like, you look at them and you're like, this seems like some sort of like 19th century mental institution, like shocking device. I don't know. It feels weird, and then you put them on and you're like, oh, this actually, it's all right.
Yeah.
But man, those are different though. They're different for sure.
Yeah.
I just, like, when we're talking about this, what would you, I feel like maybe we're not helping anybody here. What would you,
I thought this was the therapy session. I didn't realize we were here to help anybody.
What are you would you toss out like a couple of things? Like, what would somebody says, I want an audiophile, like I want to get into this. I want to try a couple of headphones. I don't want to spend a lot of money. What should I try? Like, give me something that I don't need a big amp for.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I just had a bunch of gear that I was getting ready to sell, and I let a friend of mine who, he's got a nice turntable, a nice amp speaker setup, 2-channel guy. He's got a nice little record collection. He's a musician, not by trade, but, just plays music. So he's, thoughtful about music reproduction, spends some money on the stuff, but just not a real headphone guy. I think he had a nice pair of like Sony over-ear monitors. I don't remember the exact letters and numbers, but pretty popular kind of go-to headphone. And so I was kind of curious, lent him a Grotto, banana, potato, RS2E, and a pair of ZMF cans, Atticus, and the HE6, Hyphaman HE6 V2, which I'm not selling, but that was in the pile. And what else did I lend him? Oh, Sennheiser HD650. And I gave him a decent amp and a decent DAC just to upstream all that gear. And obviously, you need power for the HE6. I just let him have everything for a week. I didn't tell him how much anything cost or what the backstory was or what the technology was. And a couple days in, he just texts me and he's like, "Yeah, I'm really sorry, man. I lost the Hyphamans. I lost the HE6s. I'm sorry." And which, if you can't see my face, obviously not true, but that was what his brain gravitated towards too, out of that pile of stuff. And what I take from that is that, like, it's if you're into music and technology, you've probably owned some headphones in your life, and you probably own some okay headphones in your life. Like, there's a lot of good stuff, right? That's under $200 that like a non-audiophile might own. They're all dynamic headphones, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of them are going to be closed back. So when you hear your first large format open back planar headphone, I know for me, that was the hook. I think I kind of blame.
Yeah, I think it was for me too, really.
So I would definitely, that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but I would definitely encourage somebody who's getting into it to get an open back planar and have that experience. Contrast it with, an affordable Grotto or, something.
5.8X.
Yeah, 5.8. Perfect, right?
Sennheiser 560S,
versus
something like that.
400 Hyphaman, like 400i or SE or what, they keep changing the names of everything, but
I think that's good right there. I feel like that could be the recommendation there. Like a 58X and a 400 SE. Those two headphones. I feel like if you start with those, you could drive them both with anything. They're different. I think that's a good starting point. As good as any.
I think you'd learn a lot about you're going to learn a lot about a couple different axes of this hobby, right? You're going to learn a lot about, how much you care about sort of ergonomics, like the weight, like the Hyphaman's going to be bigger and heavier, and you're going to be aware you're wearing it more than the Sennheiser. You're going to learn a lot about whether you like a more sort of articulate, flat, and flat always sounds like a bad word, right? But we're just saying like a very non-colored, very neutral headphone that kind of gets out of the way, versus if you want something that's puts a little sauce on there, a little bit V-shaped, a little warmth. Just how those two different technologies produce sound. I mean, sound is just air moving and hitting your ears, right? And they do it in different ways, and it feels different. I sound like a crazy person.
No. We're all crazy people here, right? That's why we have this group that we're forming.
So I think you'd learn a lot from that about, red pill, blue pill, and kind of which way. Or if you're like, I love them both, then you've also learned something, which is like, you're going to be one of these people who probably wants to have more than one flavor in their system long term. So think about versatile components that support, like I like the tube sound. OTL tube amps, so that's transformerless tube amps, right? Where it's just a tube as your power. Like, they typically have very low power thresholds. I mean, there's some where people have like ganged together tons of tubes, and that's like very spendy, and you can do it. So ignore the blanket statement. But typically OTL's not very powerful. So for low, like, easy to drive headphones, they can just be a beautiful match. But you would have had to already like pretty much settle in on what your headphone was before you decide to go down that route, because otherwise you're really limiting what you're going to be able to swap in and out of your system.
But at the same time, once if you have a curiosity towards something like that, right? Like, I think I listened to this creativity book the other day called Big Magic. I don't know. Check it out. I really enjoyed it personally, but like the author, she, like, one of her premises was like, pursue curiosity. Even if you have just some sort of inkling, like just a question, just some sort of small nag of like, you want to know about it a little bit more. She was like, just pursue it, and that will lead to more, and that will lead to more, and that will lead to more. And now that I'm saying that, it sounds kind of dangerous, but but I feel like that's kind of what this hobby is about for me anyway. It's like I hear a little something, and then I go, man, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Or I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into, tubes. Or, I'd like to dive a little more deeper into, like, that pairing. Or, something along those lines. And I feel like that's how I draw my enjoyment out of this hobby, is like I dive into these little nooks and crannies and I see what they're all about. And a lot of it for me is almost about like trying to see what other people are talking about. Like, maybe I don't hear it, but I'm like trying to hear it. That's my 6XX journey, is like I'm trying to figure out why people like that headphone, because I don't really like it, So like I finally found an amp that I thought did something with it that I was like, oh, now I can kind of hear like maybe what other people are hearing with it, and I like it. But like, I don't know, it took me a little bit to arrive at that point. So I feel like just follow those curiosities if you have the draw to them. Yeah. And you have the money, I guess.
Well, yeah, we've done a thing about buying and selling used gear. Obviously, that's the way we try to manage our budgets, and not, have significant others asking what's happened to the family bank account. But that's maybe a topic we'll revisit here in future episodes. I think there's a lot more we could sort of, like, I think there's conversations around once you've got your baseline, where do you upgrade? How do you upgrade? But I think that's like a whole nother can of worms, and maybe we won't poke on that today.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I feel like it's going to be such an individual thing too, as far as like what. Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough question. How to upgrade? I mean, I don't know about you. One thing that I try to do. I mean, I started in this as like a budget friendly thing, right? Like I was like, what's the best I can get for my money? And not that I still don't do that, but now my budget has exceeded anything I thought it would. But I still try to keep, and I still listen to regularly budget things.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't want to, I don't know how I want to put this. I don't want to feel like elitist about it. Like I have to have the best stuff to enjoy music, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Well, I think, and there's all kinds of happy discoveries too, that like even when you've spent time with the really crazy high-end gear, that like these are your headphones I have on my head right now, HE560s. Mm-hmm. Like this is not an expensive. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's not in that.
It's not crazy.
It's not crazy.
As long as you don't pay the list price, which is...
Don't pay the list price. Don't do it. Don't pay any hyphen list price ever. Like, they're just these hilarious made-up numbers that like don't have anything to do with reality. That's the top tip of the episode. But, I've been listening to some pretty high-end stuff lately, and I'm still really enjoying these. Like, they are really satisfying, and they're not trying to prove something. They don't have to prove their price tag. And I think that's kind of nice. Like sometimes the high-end gear, it won't get out of its own way. It's like got to show off to you. It's like got to prove that you spent money to get the best. I go into that more some other time, but so I think I'll try to do a quick review on these before I send them back to you, which I will send them shortly. I know it's been a minute.
Well, no rush. But I do love those headphones, and those are $200. And I feel like those are great headphones for that price.
Yeah.
Are they going to be for everybody? I don't think so. Probably not. Definitely not. But they're my gaming headphones. Like is what I use those for. That's the niche that those fill.
Nice.
And they do it wonderfully. But I don't feel like anybody talks about them. It's so weird. Like I feel like it's one of those headphones that like nobody talks about them at all.
It's a weird price. It's like a weird price point space. I feel like people love to talk about stuff under $200. People love to talk about stuff in that like $800 category, and then in $1,500, and then the top of the line stuff. But it's a weird niche.
Adorama and Hi-Fi Men. You price a headphone at $900, but then every other week it goes on sale for $200. I just think I get that people are like, I just don't even know what to think about this thing, so I'm not even gonna like come close to it. I don't know. It's weird. Yeah. It's a weird strategy. I feel like.
I feel like that too. I don't get it at all, and everyone knows it. It's like, who do they think they're just going to get somebody on an off week that's going to pay?
I feel like
the
they
full
sell
list?
like 3 a year for $900, and they must be really happy about it or something. I don't know.
It's very bizarre. Or do they just think people are going to see it with the slash through price and be like, "Oh my god, I got to take advantage of this sale. It'll never happen again. It's too good to be true."
Like anybody that buys a Hi-Fi Man HE560 has not like meticulously researched it, and like somebody buys that on a whim. Like that's the one headphone. I don't know.
I just wandered into this online store. What do you got? Oh, hey, partner. Well, I think we could start winding it down. I know you and I had talked before about trying to get more of a dialogue going with people in the community. And so I don't know that we have the mechanics figured out yet, but hopefully we'll find a way to either collect like a voice memo or get some dial-in thing or get some emails, like find some way. Like we'd love to have topic suggestions, questions, ideas.
And if you're interested in maybe joining us for a conversation or something, let one of us know, reach out to us and we'll discuss it. I think we're still exploring what this should be and what this could be, but I think we're both of the mindset the more voices we can bring to this, probably the more helpful it's going to be to other people out there, delving into these same topics and grappling with these same ridiculous, struggles of audiophilia.
It's extremely first world problems. No, I love hearing other people's stories and hearing what they've tried and where they ended up with their system and how they got there. Like I nerd out on that stuff. It's like a no judgment zone. So if anyone wants to come just share, what they've tried and what they learned and what they liked, like I think everyone would benefit from hearing more stories and more voices. So hit us up for sure. Please do.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good spot to end it.
If you made it this far, congrats. Great. Well, until next time, we look forward to happy and safe listening, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Yeah. Thanks. See ya.